Hear you.
A
Yeah,
very
very
good
clear.
evening. A very good evening to one and all present for this webinar. I, Professor Kajal Baviskar, extend a warm welcome to today's resource person, Mr. Asaf Shamsi, sir, dignitaries, and all attendees on the behalf of KKBAG Pharmacy Institutes to this wonderful session. Thank you everyone for taking time out and being here today for this webinar. KKBAG Education Society is a leading name in educational field in not only Nashik district or North Maharashtra, but also all over India since past 50 years. It was established by the visionary leader, late Padma Shri Karmavir Kakasaheb Wag. There are total 36 institutes running in 9 different campuses and engaged in studies from KG to PhD in various fields. KKWAG is known for academic excellence and is most trusted brand in education. Being part of a highly regulated industry, pharmaceutical companies face the challenging task of complying with a myriad of rules and regulations across all aspects of their business. In recent years, the number and complexity of regulatory business requirements has increased substantially. It is crucial for pharmaceutical companies to respond to this ever-changing regulatory environment because for them, non-compliance has a profound effect on cost, reputation, business, and ultimately lives of the patients. Also, complying with regulatory requirements is the highest and surest guarantee and safeguard for the efficiency and efficacy of a product. Thus, importance of regulatory compliance cannot be overlooked. To give more insights on this topic, we have a very renowned personality, Mr. Asaf Shamsi, sir, Director and CEO of International Operations at Pharmalliance amongst us. I would now request our principal, Dr. K.S. Jain, sir, to welcome all the guests.
Good evening and welcome. And I welcome you, dear Asaf. Thanks a lot for accepting our invitation and making it possible. And I'm sure your very, very rich knowledge will be very useful to our students and all the audiences, one and all. Dear friends, today we are going to deal with a subject called as drug regulatory affairs, which may be quite a new name for many of these students. But basically, it deals, the regulation comes from the governments and it comes all across the world. The more the progressed country is there, more the tough are the regulations. As you know, drugs are very, very important and potent substances which are involved in relieving our pain, fever, or combating infections, or even managing and controlling our disorders, and even in extreme cases, saving our lives. Their production, their QC, their QA, their distribution, everything needs to be regulated. And it is the facilities of manufacturers, their quality, and even their distribution, their packaging, all is very, very precisely regulated. Thus, drug regulatory affairs becomes a very, very important subject, and it is also very challenging yet a very, very lucrative career. US FDA, MHRA, TGA, etc. Are a few names when industry talks, particularly those big industries which are into exports. As you may be knowing, India is one of the few countries having largest number of US FDA approved plants. These agencies which I mentioned, these are a few. Every country has its own agency and so has India. These are very tough to deal with, and for their approval, you need to actually, and particularly if you wish to export materials, or if you are into new drug discovery and you are going to conduct clinical trials at every stage, you need to get approval, and so lot of very systematic documentation is to be done. And for this, you really need a very good focus, very good training, and you have to be very, very particular. So this is really one of the very, very open field, and this is going to grow and grow as India is also growing as a superpower in field of pharma. Coming to Mr. Asaf Shamsi, who is now a seasoned player in this, not only nationally, internationally. We know each other since 1983. That is exactly 37 years. I have been seeing him. He is a dual citizen. He is a Canadian as well as Indian. He is also the custodian by the Canadian High Commission. And he has been doing many audits, not only in India, but also in US and Europe and Western world. So he has lot of things to share. And I requested him particularly that you little bit you will have to come down to the international level and come to the ground stage, so our students particularly and even some of our staffs also will get interested and understand the subject, because I know this subject holds a great potential. I have seen Asaf Shamsi getting entry to many big places. Myself, I went to with him to many companies in Bombay. Even he knows personally Mr. Yusuf Hamid, who is the owner of Cipla, and he has fantastic contacts. And he's a very open-minded person, very well mannered and well natured person, and a very good orator, most importantly. So I just try to tell you one example. When I was working as a vice president of Dishman Pharmaceuticals, I happened to be the part of the team which was facing the US FDA. So we had hired a consultant. I'm talking something about 1995. And that time we were paying that consultant $500 per hour. Today it may be many folds. He may be knowing it. So that is the potential of this field. It's like a lawyer who is defending you in Supreme Court, as good as that. Because if everything is right, but if your papers are not right, then you may lose a multi-million dollar order. So somebody in a seminar told that if you want to market and export in USA, you don't need technical people, but you need very good patent attorneys as well as DRA people. So that is the importance of this. And without wasting much time, once again, thanking all the attendees and particularly the coordinator, Kajal madam, who has really taken very good pains and making this event true. And once again, thanking my dear friend Asaf for consenting and being always open to any discussion. I hand over the reins back to the coordinator. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now I would request my colleague, Professor Pooja Magar, to introduce our guest, Mr. Asaf Shamsi, sir. Please, Pooja, madam. Thank you, madam. Thank you, madam. Good evening, all. Myself, Professor Pooja Magar. It is my great privilege to introduce our today's eminent speaker, Mr. Asaf Shamsi, CEO and Director, International Operations, Pharmalliance. He is very well-known personality in the world of pharma regulatory affairs. Sir is pharmaceutical industry professional who has worked in senior level positions for corporate organizations and as consultant based in North America and India in close association with clients in India, USA, Canada, Europe, China, Latin America, Africa, etc., representing their interests in worldwide markets and regulatory agencies in North America, Europe, and other countries. Sir has over 35 years of experience in regulatory affairs, CGXP, auditing, quality systems, compliance management, conceptualization, design and setup of state-of-the-art manufacturing, testing and R&D facilities, strategic planning, strategic business development, strategic assets acquisitions, and divestments in the pharmaceutical and related industries in regulated and other emerging markets worldwide. Sir has personal contacts in international markets and extensive experience in interacting with regulatory agencies in USA, Canada, Europe, Australia, Latin America, and Africa, as well as WHO. Sir is an external member, Board of Studies, Pharmaceutical and Hospital Management, and Public Health Delhi Pharmaceutical Sciences and Research University, New Delhi. Sir had several voluntary or advisory roles in industry associations such as Confederation of Indian Industry, the Indian Drug Manufacturers Association, and NGOs such as Canadian Cooperative Associations, Self-Employed Women's Association, Center for Environment Education. Sir is Warden of Canadian High Commission, New Delhi. Sir is former member, Working Group for Economic Renewal, Government, Ontario. You will be amazed to know that Sir is eligible to live, work, and conduct business in India, Canada, USA, and can travel freely without visa and conduct business anywhere in European Union and some non-European countries in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, some countries in Latin America and Far Eastern Africa. Currently, he is CEO and Director, International Operations, Pharmalliance, President, Synergy Intellect Canada, and Director of Vichem Consulting, Mumbai. Pharmalliance, where the expectations meet expertise, is a knowledge-driven, independent professional consultancy firm dedicated to serving pharmaceutical, biopharmaceutical, API, excipient, medical device, and allied industries in regulated and other emerging markets around rest of the world. Since its inception in January 2000, Pharmalliance has an outstanding track record for providing complete end-to-end, highly specialized and tailor-made consulting services. Pharmalliance has strong international links with technological, manufacturing, regulatory, contract research, and marketing organizations in several countries. Pharmalliance provides consultation services ranging right from documentation to auditing and facility approvals by regulatory authorities from countries like USA, Australia, Brazil, and many more. In short, Pharmalliance is great solution over pharma regulatory affairs in the world of pharmaceutical industries. I would like to mention here that Kekiwa College of Pharmacy has signed one MOU with Pharmalliance recently. There is much to say about Shamsi sir and Pharmalliance, but due to time constraint, without much ado, I shall kindly request Mr. Asaf Shamsi to commence this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that extensive introduction. And I'd like to thank my dear friend, Dr. Kishore Jain, for giving me this opportunity to be with all of you here. And I'd like to wish you a very, very good evening. Without too much of ado, I'd like to say that today's topic is extremely extensive and very vast. Today, what we're going to do is just skim the surface. It's impossible to go into depth in terms of each of the various aspects of regulations which govern the pharmaceutical industry. So this is going to be, like I said, a skim of the surface of the world of pharma regulations. Let me start my presentation without much delay. Here we go. Okay, this is just an introductory screen, which basically depicts how we serve global markets. And now to the topic, the overarching importance of regulatory compliance in the pharmaceutical industry. We've been seeing all kinds of graphs, charts, curves, whatever on TV a lot lately. We haven't been able to go out of our homes much, and the news media is full of a lot of charts. So I think all of us have become experts at reading charts. I'm going to start this presentation with a very simple chart, which basically gives you an idea of how big the global pharmaceutical industry is. The pharmaceutical industry is the most regulated industry in the world, and it is also among the most profitable industries in the world, with a consistent global compounded annual growth rate of 4 to 6%. Now, if you see the actual numbers here, now, as of 2019, it was 1.2 trillion US dollars, and the growth rate was close to 5.5, almost 6%. Now, there's a reason why I'm showing you these numbers. The next graph is even more interesting. Here we have a percentage-wise breakup of the dollar volume of pharmaceutical sales worldwide. It's very interesting to note that the USA, Canada, the European Economic Area, Japan, make up 80% of the global market. You can see here, North America, US and Canada close to 50%, Europe about 25%, and Japan, it has come down a little bit, 10%. So more or less 80% of the pharmaceutical market is concentrated in these three zones. One might think China, India, they're huge markets, but in dollar volumes, they're not. They belong to the rest of the 20% with Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Now, when we talk about the global pharmaceutical market, we come across a whole plethora of terms. You know, you can see them all jumbled up here. I'm not even going to try and name or say any of them out loud, but no pharmaceutical company is isolated from the global environment. To be successful and to grow, companies have to integrate into the global market and reach customers where the major sales volumes are generated. And where are the major sales volumes? I just told you, 80% of them belong to this red zone. And these red zones are the highly regulated markets. The Middle East, Russia, India, and China are kind of semi-regulated because they have some kind of regulatory systems in place, but they're not fully there yet as compared to these countries. And the rest of the world, the regulatory barriers are relatively less. But at the same time, if you look at this block, Middle East, Russia, India, China, ASEAN, and the rest of all the continents, they constitute only 20% of the global market. You've got to remember that. Now, in order to be in the market, any market, what does the pharmaceutical industry need to do? Now, this is the business process which is generally followed by all pharmaceutical companies, whether they're big, small, medium, large, whatever. The first, obviously, is to set up new facilities or upgrade existing facilities if they've bought over something or any of that. The next thing they need to do is to develop and implement quality systems. The next thing is to get the required facility approvals and then also get the required product approvals. And this is the only way in which they will be able to get to international markets. Now, all of these steps involve a certain set of activities, and we will cover them very briefly, one by one, through the course of this presentation. Now, in each of these steps, regulatory compliance is both critical and also mandatory. Let's start with the first set of activities. Now, in order to set up a pharmaceutical company, obviously you need to have a factory. You need to make products somewhere. Now, state-of-the-art manufacturing, testing, and development facilities and the modernization of existing facilities to meet stringent international GMP, GLP, and GCP regulatory compliance standards has become imperative for success in an industry where the horizons are global, they're no longer national. So when you design a facility, what do you need to do? The first thing is you have to figure out what you want to make, whether you want to make tablets, capsules, injectables, what kind of dosage forms do you want to make, or do you want to make active pharmaceutical ingredients, or do you want to make adjunct products like excipients, or even maybe devices or packaging materials. So depending on that, you'll have to decide what kind of facility you want to set up. And there you have to conceptualize and prepare the preliminary designs. Now, a lot of people, what they do is they end up buying a building or buying a property and then trying to fit the factory inside it. The better way of doing it is to define your process flow, your man movements, material movements, and make sure that you design the building and the factory site around the process and not the other way around. A lot of the older factories that we see in India are crammed into all kinds of buildings which were never built for the purpose of pharmaceutical manufacturing. So that's one aspect that needs to be kept in mind. Then obviously you need to make your project reports, work out the capital costs, the feasibility and everything, select your equipment, and then prepare your detailed engineering designs, including the architectural designs as well as the structural designs. Now, HVAC systems, what are they? You need them in order to provide proper containment. Containment is a word which we've been hearing a lot these days. And what is containment? Containment simply means that you isolate an area so that there is no contamination from extraneous areas to a process or a procedure due to the external environment. So you have different classes of areas where, let's say, for example, you want to make sterile products, then you will have to have a very, very high degree of containment so that the microbial load is minimal and the product's integrity is not compromised. Similarly, if you're making oral solid dosage forms, you'll need to avoid dusting and all of those other things which cause flying of dust and one product to contaminate another product which might be manufactured in the same general manufacturing area. Then, of course, you need your utilities like water systems, steam, nitrogen gas, if you're making APIs for blanketing, things like that. And then, obviously, you need the electrical, mechanical, and the firefighting systems, effluent treatment systems. And then you arrive at the final design, which is called the facility master plan. And finally, once you have made all of that, you also have to have a validation master plan in place where it simply means that all of your facilities, including the building, your equipment, your manufacturing process, and your testing processes have been designed to perform as intended. Now, when you say as intended, you have to make sure that you have a program which proves that they perform as intended. So these are all the aspects that you need to take into account when you are setting up a manufacturing facility. And obviously, you have all these nice people who are going to come and look at it. You have the FDA in the US, Health Canada, the European Medicines Agency, the EDQM in Europe, the MHRA in the UK, TGA Australia, MedSafe New Zealand, MCC South Africa, Anvisa Brazil, and the WHO, and of course, our CDSCO or the local drug authorities. All of them are going to want to look at what you have done here and make sure that you've done it right. Now, in order to do that, there are several regulations that you would have to study and make sure that your facility complies with each and every one of these. There are many, many more because, like I said, we are only skimming the surface here, but these are the overarching broad regulations which then branch out into various guidelines and other specifications that you would be required to follow when you design the facility. So the first one, I'm sure everybody has heard of 21 CFR. So that's the US Current Good Manufacturing Practice Regulation for manufacturing, processing, packing, or holding of drugs. Parts 210 and Parts 211, which is Current Good Manufacturing Practice for finished pharmaceuticals. The corresponding regulation for Europe is the Udrelex Volume 4, which is Good Manufacturing Practice Guidelines, Parts 1 to 3. And it's the same thing. And then, of course, you also have the World Health Organization, WHO, Good Manufacturing Practices. Then for APIs, you have the ICH guideline, Q7, Good Manufacturing Practice Guide for active pharmaceutical ingredients, and the IPEC guidelines for the manufacture of pharmaceutical excipients. Now, you will see that each and every component that makes up a pharmaceutical dosage form is covered by some form of regulation or the other, and all of those regulations have to be kept in mind when you design or build your manufacturing facility. What's next? Now you have a facility. The next thing you need to do is to figure out how to run it. You have your facility, you have your equipment. Now you need to develop a system which you follow so that you are able to manufacture the products that you want. Now, quality is of primary concern when it comes to any pharmaceutical product. And the requirements of good manufacturing, laboratory, and clinical practices are underpinned by a central objective. And what is that? It is to create a system of programs, policies, processes, and facilities that prevent errors and defects. It's one thing to detect errors and defects after they've happened, but your quality system should be such that those errors do not happen, or even if they do happen, they happen at the very minimum. So what makes up a quality system? The first thing you have to have is a set of standards. Now, why should standards be documented? Standards should be documented because they need to be consistent. Now, examples of standards are your product specifications, your raw material specifications. You have all kinds of things. If you have a manufacturing area which is supposed to be kept at a certain temperature, then the temperature range becomes your standard. If it has to be kept at a certain type of humidity, then the humidity becomes your standard, etc. Now, standards is one thing. Now, in order to achieve those standards, you need to have a procedure or procedures. Now, these are operating instructions, work instructions, which are all standardized, which means they need to be written down so that people can follow them in order to get the results that are specified in your standards. Now, standard operating procedures provide that base. Uh, Basically, if you have a documented procedure and you train people to do an operation according to that particular procedure by following step 1, 2, so on and so forth, that person will be able to achieve the required outcome. Similarly, if there's another person and if the procedure is properly documented and he follows that procedure, he will also be able to achieve the same outcome. So it's very important that all the procedures that are to be followed, whether they are for operating of machinery, whether they are for testing of raw materials, finished products, intermediates, whatever, are properly documented and also properly followed. Now, I have mentioned this particular item here, master and batch production and control records separately. There's a reason for that. Now, this is also an SOP. It's a standard operating procedure for manufacturing the product, starting from the raw material all the way to the market-ready finished packaged product. Now, this is a document which each company is required to have for each product. And based on this document, there will be a whole branch of procedures that will come out. Let's say you have to use X set of equipment in order to make X product. Now, this document is going to specify what equipment you need to use, and that equipment will also have its own operating procedure, and so on and so forth. So this particular document is the base from which all your other procedures and what you're going to do in order to manufacture that product is going to be generated. Now, you also need to have quality assurance procedures and documentation to prove that you have actually performed all those operations and documented them, in the sense that when you document something, it's a record that you have done an activity at so and so time, so and so date, and it's a record that it was performed at that time. So it's very important that all the records, reports, and documents are generated at the time the activities are performed. And they constitute the evidence that you have actually done the activity that was specified and got the result that you were supposed to get. Now, when you have documented records, you also are able to investigate if something goes wrong. If you have a record, you can go back and say, okay, we did this, and that's probably where the mistake happened. And then we find out, what went wrong. Let us say that you make a mistake and you come up with a product which maybe fails its specifications or otherwise does not meet the requirements. So quality systems are extremely important. What are the different regulations that govern the quality system? Again, we come back to current good manufacturing practices. Then you have the OECD Good Laboratory Practice Guidelines and guidelines for the testing of chemicals. Then you have the 20 of Federal Regulation, Part 58, the Good Clinical Practices Guidelines, Pharmaceutical Development, Quality Risk Management, and the Pharmaceutical Quality System Guideline. Now we come to the area where a lot of people have a lot of apprehensions: audits. And people have apprehensions for very good reasons. There have been a growing number of cases where pharmaceutical and allied manufacturers, as well as contract testing, R&D, preclinical and clinical research organizations, have been cited by various regulatory authorities for deficiencies in GXP, in spite of having satisfied numerous inspections from the US FDA, EMA, EDQM, and so on. Now, when a regulatory authority gives you a citation saying that you are not compliant, the consequences can be very bad, and you can lose a lot of business, and also you can lose your reputation completely. So what are the different kinds of audits that are mandated by pharmaceutical regulations? The first thing is the first party audits. Now, these are internal audits of your own facilities that you're required to conduct by law. The second type of audit is when an external party comes to audit you because they want to buy something from you, or there's an external consultant who you may appoint so that you know what the deficiencies in your facilities might be. The third type of audit is contractor and vendor audit, which is audits of other facilities by your own company in order to approve your suppliers or your contract manufacturers or your contract testing facilities. And of course, the fourth and the most critical and the most important audit is the regulatory inspection. That is audits of your facilities by regulatory authorities for facility or product approvals. Now, again, you will not be allowed to operate your facility unless you clear this particular audit. So that's how important it is. Now, what are the different areas that are looked at when an audit is conducted? Very broadly, you have what is the objective of the audit in terms of what is being audited. It could be an API, it could be a finished pharmaceutical, it could even be an excipient, it could be a medical device, it could be anything. So, and what are the applicable regulations under which the audit is being conducted, and the scope of the audit. The scope of the audit normally limits the audit to a set or a class of products, or most often it's usually a single product. Now, what should you be looking for? Whether you are doing the audit or you're being audited, these are the areas that auditors are going to look at. Quality management, they're going to look at all these aspects here. Principles, what are the responsibilities of the quality unit and whether they have been properly defined. What are the responsibilities of the production unit and whether they have been defined and documented. Whether the company does internal audits regularly and whether the audit reports are available. All of these things. Then whether the personnel are appropriately qualified, follow proper hygiene, and whether they're properly trained. Then they're going to look at buildings and facilities, all of these aspects: design and construction, utilities, water system, containment, lighting, sewage and refuse. It's very important how you dispose of waste. And then sanitation and maintenance. They're also going to look at equipment, design and construction, equipment maintenance and cleaning, calibration, and computerized systems. Calibration is important because if your equipment is not calibrated, anything that you weigh, measure, is going to be wrong. And therefore, your product will not be guaranteed to comply with specifications. Then, of course, they're going to look at documentation and records, all of these, how you manage your materials, production and in-process controls, packaging and labeling, storage and distribution, warehousing and distribution procedures, laboratory controls, validation of your analytical procedures, and then also your validation process policy, validation documentation, qualification of equipment, how you validate everything so that your systems are guaranteed to produce consistent results. They'll also look at change control. When you make any changes to your facility, process, anything, how is it documented and how is it done? When you have rejections, what do you do with them? When you have complaints, what do you do with complaints? And if you need to recall products, how do you do it? If you have any contract manufacturers where you're getting products made by somebody else, then they want to look at those too. And then they also want to look at your distributors, agents, brokers, and everything. So one way or the other, facility approvals are critical to you're being able to be successful in the marketplace. You have to look at the manufacturing facility like a computer. A computer needs not only hardware, but also an operating system and software programs to function. Similarly, a manufacturing facility requires not only well-constructed buildings and suitable equipment, but also well-defined operating systems, procedures, and well-trained personnel for functioning. Regulatory authorities will not approve a manufacturing facility unless the hardware and the software is completely in compliance with applicable regulations. The regulatory authorities in regulated markets will generally approve a facility only with reference to an application for approval of specific products. There is no blanket facility approval granted for manufacture of all products that may be manufactured in the facility. The WHO GMP certification program gives GMP certificates for a period of 2 years, but these are not binding on national regulatory authorities. You have to remember this. The WHO GMP certificate is not a binding document which regulatory authorities of other countries are bound to accept. It is a non-binding certificate. So if you go to sell your product, let's say in the US, and say that, look, I have a WHO GMP certificate, the US FDA is going to tell you, we're sorry, but unless you clear our inspections and our audits and submit our documentation, we don't care. So that's basically what you need to remember. Now, we've covered facilities, and now we come to products. In order to market your products in different regions of the world, you obviously need to get them approved from regulatory authorities. So over here, this is just a basic chart which tells you that in the USA, what kind of regulatory submissions you need to make. Canada, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Brazil, South Africa, the WHO in Geneva, and the ASEAN countries. So in the US, for APIs, you have the drug master files. For biologics, you have biologics master files. For generic drug products, you have abbreviated new drug applications, or ANDAs, and for new drug products, which is innovator drug products, you have the NDA, or the new drug application. Then for biologics that are meant to be sold in finished dosage form, like vaccines, for example, you have what is known as a biologics license application. Then for medical devices, you have 510(k) submissions. Then to get your NDC numbers, which is the national drug listing number in the USA for marketing in the USA, you have the electronic drug submissions, which you have to make via the EDRLS. The requirements are similar in Canada. Again, drug master files for APIs, abbreviated or new drug submissions for new drugs and generic drugs, medical device submissions. Here, instead of the NDC numbers, you have the DIN numbers, and then drug establishment license. In Europe, again, the same thing, just names are different. This is for active substances. You have EDQM certificates of suitability for actives and excipients, and you have full or abridged marketing authorization applications for pharmaceutical dosage forms and the CE mark for medical devices. Again, the requirements are very similar for all of these countries. Now, in order to get a product approved, multiple countries, you have to make multiple applications, and in the good old days, each country had its own format or requirements in terms of how and how much data you were required to submit in order to get a product approval. Now, over the last 20 years or so, there's been an effort to harmonize these requirements, and so that whenever technical data for a drug is required to be presented to the regulatory authorities, first of all, the format is standardized, and secondly, to a large extent, even the data requirements also are standardized. Now, we have reached a stage where largely the format has been standardized, but the data requirements of different regulatory authorities in different regions of the world have still not been completely standardized. But this document, the Common Technical Document, or the CTD, basically provides a framework for standardization of data submissions for drug approvals, including approvals for APIs. So this became mandatory for new drug applications in the EU and Japan in 2003. And it is even today strongly recommended for submissions in the United States to the US FDA. The CTD format has now been adopted by most regulatory authorities around the world. Now, what is the CTD? The ICH website itself has this diagram where it tells you about the different components of the CTD. Now, at the very top, you have Module 1, which is not part of the CTD because it is specific to specific countries. So regional administrative information, like you may have application forms, you may have different kinds of labeling, you may have different justifications for which you are submitting an application in that country, patent clearances, etc., etc., etc. As far as the rest of the data is concerned, everything is part of the CTD. So you have the quality data, which is the summary as well as the main body of data. Similarly, you have the non-clinical data, which is the toxicity data, and the non-clinical study reports. And then you have the clinical data, which is basically your clinical trials and everything that you may have done in order to get your, make sure that your product meets the necessary requirements. Let's go a little more in detail. Module 1, like I said, is not a part of the CTD, and it has to contain regional or country-specific information, such as administrative forms, labeling, and other region-specific information. Module 2 basically consists of summaries of all the data that's going to come later in modules 3, 4, and 5. So you have the table of contents, introduction, the quality overall summary, the drug substance. Now, this particular part of the CTD is used to file drug master files for APIs in the US, Canada, and in other countries. Okay. Now you have then module 2, the drug substance, which is your API, active pharmaceutical ingredient, and then you have the drug product, which is your formulation, which is the dosage form, which is going to be made from all the components, including your excipients and everything. Then you have the appendixes for facilities, equipment, any adventitious agents, if there are any, and for your excipients. Now, here, this part and this part of the CTD also forms the content of the type 4 and type 3 DMFs in the US and Canada, and for the CEP in Europe for excipients. Then you have the regional information, non-clinical overview, which is the safety information, clinical overview, which is the efficacy information, and the clinical, non-clinical and clinical tabulated summaries of data. Then you come to the main body of data, that is module 3. So that is divided into 3 parts. One is the quality data, which includes all the data about the manufacturing, and the analytical controls and the facility part of the application, and the physical characteristics of the product. The other 2 parts, module 4, this is safety, that is non-clinical study reports, which basically give the safety data in terms of how safe the product is. And in module 5, you have the clinical study reports, which basically give data about the clinical trials and how effective your product is. So the CTD is nothing but a format in which you just have to plug in all your data elements and submit them to the relevant regulatory authorities. Now, we go one step further. These days, the US FDA, the European Union, and a number of other countries have stopped accepting paper submissions. Now, there are a lot of developed and developing nations that still support paper submissions as opposed to electronic submissions until they're equipped to fully accommodate electronic submissions. The days of paper-based submissions are now past. A regulatory dossier in the electronic format is now essential in the global marketplace. And the United States already issued a guidance saying that they're going to make electronic submissions compulsory in a phased manner as of different dates. As of today, all submissions to the United States FDA have to be made only in electronic format. They will not accept paper submissions for anything. Similarly, there are a number of countries, that have stopped accepting paper submissions. Let's go to the next slide and you'll know who they are. You have the US FDA, ECTD is approved. The non-electronic submission like PDF files, they don't take, and paper, they don't take at all. Similarly, you have Canada, ECTD, again, no other format, and they may ask you to print certain sections if required. Similarly, the EMA, ECTD is mandatory. Different European Economic Area authorities also want the ECTD. Switzerland also wants the ECTD. All of these countries, well, TGA, Australia, does not currently accept ECTDs, but they're going to do that very, very soon. A lot of other countries are now starting to accept the ECTD. So you have to keep that in mind. Paper is out, electronic is in. Now, let's go step by step to the regulatory requirements for different components that make up a pharmaceutical formulation. The most important component, obviously, is the active pharmaceutical ingredient, the API, or the bulk drug. Now, most countries have elaborate procedures for ensuring that the API quality that goes into a product which is sold in their country is controlled. So in the USA, you have what is known as a type 2 drug master file, or a DMF. In Canada, you have a DMF, a type 1 DMF. In Europe, it's called the active substance master file, or ASMF, or it used to be called the European Drug Master File, or EDMF earlier. And the WHO calls it an active pharmaceutical ingredient master file, or APIMF, for the API pre-qualification program at the WHO. Now, what is an API master file? We'll come to the CEP dossier in the next slide. It corresponds, like I said earlier, to modules 2.3.S and 3.2.S of the Common Technical Document. Any application for approval of a generic product is required to include full details of the chemistry, manufacturing processes, and controls of the active ingredients, which are used in the manufacture of the finished dosage form. And very often, dosage form manufacturers do not have full access to information that is considered to be confidential. Now, if I'm making a bulk drug, I don't want to be telling my customer my exact process as to how I make it, what is my technology. I'd be very afraid that my technology would be lost. Therefore, most bulk drug manufacturers or API manufacturers do not like to disclose full details of their manufacturing processes to their customers. However, the regulatory authorities want the customer to give them everything. Now, in order to solve this problem, you have this document, the drug master file. So what the API manufacturer does is he prepares a drug master file which contains all the data that is going to be required by the regulatory authority, and then submits it directly to the regulatory authority without disclosing it to the formulation manufacturer. What the formulation manufacturer has to do is that when they prepare their application, like an ANDA or an NDA, they will simply have to give a letter of authorization or a reference letter to that drug master file, which is already filed with the regulator, saying that we have bought this API from this company and we have used it to manufacture this product for which we are giving you our formulation data for approval. So a DMF or ASMF or EDMF is a document which is prepared by an active pharmaceutical ingredient manufacturer and submitted directly to the appropriate regulatory authority in the intended drug market in order to preserve the confidentiality of the manufacturing technology of the API manufacturer. So you have all of these regulatory documentation types for these particular countries. And the data requirements for all of them are essentially the same. However, in Europe, you have another system, the certificates of suitability. The term CEP stands for Certification of Suitability of European Pharmacopoeia Monographs to control an active pharmaceutical ingredient or a pharmaceutical excipient. The term COS, which is often used for certificate of suitability, is not the official acronym. The official acronym is CEP. And the main purpose of the CEP process is to assess the suitability of the European Pharmacopoeia monographs to control the chemical purity, microbiological quality, and the TSE risk, that is transmittable spongiform encephalopathy risk, which is commonly known as mad cow disease, if it is relevant for any substance covered by the monographs, and to check compliance at the manufacturing and or distribution sites with both good manufacturing practice for medicinal or for human or veterinary products. Now, one of the things that you have to remember, that if an API or an excipient does not have a monograph in the European Pharmacopoeia, then you cannot get a CEP. You can only get a CEP for those products that are part of the European Pharmacopoeia. What are the advantages? Now, in Europe, when you have an ASMF or a European Drug Master File, there are two parts to it. The open part, which is given to the dosage form manufacturer, and there's a closed part which is submitted to the regulatory authorities, which contains details of the manufacturing process and the testing of raw materials, etc., etc. That is given to the regulatory authority. So if you have 100 customers, you would have to give each one of them the open part of your European Drug Master File in Europe. In the US, you're not required to do that. You just submit it to the FDA and give a letter to the manufacturer. Now, the EDQM certificate of suitability is a process by which you simply submit a dossier to the European Directorate of Quality of Medicines and Healthcare in Strasbourg, and they will evaluate the dossier independently and make sure that your API meets all the European requirements. And then they will give you a certificate saying that we have found your API to be complying and the quality can be controlled by the EP monograph. So it is just one dossier. It is reviewed once, and based on the the data submitted, you either get a certificate or you get rejected. But then you can try again and correct whatever you need to correct, submit it again, you still get it. Now, once you get it, it is valid for 5 years, and after that you are required to renew it one time for another period of 5 years. Now, once it gets renewed after the first expiration, then it is valid indefinitely. What you're only required to do then is to inform the EDQM if you make any changes to your facility or your process or your batch size or any other changes that you make with respect to whatever information you have given in your dossier. You're required to inform EDQM before implementing any of those changes. That's the only requirement. Your CEP will remain valid indefinitely if you fulfill these requirements. Now, again, as I said, the data requirements correspond to Module 2.3S and Module 3.2S of the CTD. Now, the CEP is basically, like I said earlier, a substitute for the European Drug Master Files. Now, once you have a certificate, all you're required to do is give a copy of the certificate to your customer who's going to make the formulation from your API. The certificate is recognized by all EU licensing authorities and are valid in 30 European Pharmacopoeia Commission member countries and partially accepted in 27 observer countries. So they have a wide degree of acceptance. Even Australia, Canada, if you have a CEP, then your review gets shortened substantially. The next component is your pharmaceutical excipients. Now, excipients, what are they? They are substances other than the API which have been appropriately evaluated for safety and are intentionally included in a drug delivery system for the purpose of bulking up formulations that contain potent active ingredients or to confirm a therapeutic enhancement on the active ingredients in the final dosage form, such as facilitating or modifying drug release, absorption, or solubility, or to impart other organoleptic properties such as color, flavor, or taste masking. So excipients are added to formulations basically for any or all of these reasons. And therefore, they form an inalienable part of your drug product. So what the regulators want to do is they want to make sure that the excipients are also made with the same degree of care as the active ingredient or anything else that goes into the drug formulation. Therefore, the US and Canada both recommend that you have type 4 and type 3 drug master files for your excipients. There's an organization called the International Pharmaceutical Excipients Council, which basically sets standards for the quality of excipients. And they also have a format for an excipient master file. Now, again, just like the API, excipient manufacturers may not want their manufacturing processes to be revealed to different formulators, and therefore, if they prepare this excipient master file or type 4 or type 3 drug master file and submit it to the relevant authorities, they can simply issue a letter of access to the formulator, which is their customer, and the file would be reviewed with reference to the application which is submitted by the customer. The data requirements correspond to Module 2.3S and Module 3.2S of the Common Technical Document. Why? Because most excipients, as it is, they're chemical products. The only thing is they don't have any therapeutic activity, but at the same time, they do have a manufacturing process, they have chemical properties, physical properties, they have to be tested by chemical processes, and therefore, whatever data you're required to give has to follow the data requirements of these two parts of the CTD. The next is your packaging materials. Regulatory agencies want to know what your product is going to be packaged in. And the primary packaging material is that material which is in direct contact with the product, and the same material also holds the product. Now, this is very important to understand that the material which holds the product for a certain period of time till it is taken by the patient, or it is used, if it is an API, then if it is used in further manufacturing process, is going to be in direct contact with either the dosage form or the API or the excipient, for a certain period of time. And the properties of the material have to be such that it does not impart any kind of adverse characteristics to the material that has been stored in it. So the function of the primary packaging materials is to contain and to restrict any chemical, climatic, biological, microbiological, or occasionally mechanical hazards that may cause to, to lead to product deterioration and to ensure product stability and safety throughout the intended shelf life of the products. What are examples of primary packaging materials? You have a lot of them. Glass ampoules, tubular vials, aluminum foil for strip packaging and blister packaging, PVC films, unprinted and printed laminates, plastic granules for blow, fill, and seal or BFS or FFS processes, HDPE bottles and drums, PET bottles, absorbent cotton wads. Now, you might have noticed that a lot of products that are sold in bottles come with a wad of cotton, in the bottle, which you have to remove before you can dispense the product. So even that is a packaging material. Then you have things like induction seals, which are put on bottles to prevent tampering, and then collapsible aluminum tubes, laminated tubes, plastic tubes, pouches, retort pouches, plastic caps and closures, rubber closures, liner bags, big plastic bags that are used for packing bulk materials like APIs, excipients, etc. Then you have aluminum bags, canisters, so many different kinds. I mean, it's impossible to list the whole different range of packaging materials here, but these are just some of the examples of those which are very, very commonly used for pharmaceutical products. Now, for packaging materials, you have what is known as a Type 3 drug master file in the US and a Type 2 drug master file in Canada. With regard to other countries, you have to give all the details about the packaging materials in your drug application itself. But the US and Canada let you file master files for packaging materials, which are basically assessed in a similar way to the drug master files for APIs and excipients. Now that you have gone over most of the components that make up a drug product, we come to the actual product itself. Remember that the API, the excipient, or the packaging material are not approved or disapproved. It's very important to understand that an API, excipient, packaging material is not approved or disapproved. It is only reviewed with reference to the product in which it is going to be used, and it is the product which is approved, which means de facto, if your API or your excipient or your packaging material, they are all okay. Oops, sorry about that. Then your drug product, if it is approved, it means that de facto, all the components that go into the drug are okay. So I'm only going to talk about generic drug products here because that's the most relevant to the Indian environment. If we start talking about NDAs and investigational drug products and everything, then we could probably be talking for a week. So let's confine ourselves to generic drug products. What is a generic drug? A generic drug is the same as the original innovator drug in terms of active ingredients, dosage form, safety, strength, route of administration, performance, and intended use. Generic drugs provide a safe, effective, and low-cost alternative to the innovator's original branded product. Now, all of the countries comprising of the regulated markets have established elaborate and stringent regulations and procedures for approval of generic drug products. In the USA, you have the abbreviated new drug application, or the ANDA. In Canada, it's called the abbreviated new drug submission, or the ABNDS. In Europe, you have abridged marketing authorization applications, or the AMAA. In Australia, they're called TGA registration dossiers. In New Zealand, they're called MedSafe new medicine applications, or NMAs. Brazil, in Anvisa, they're called product registration dossiers, or PRDs. In South Africa, they call them registration dossiers. In the WHO Geneva, they call them finished pharmaceutical product FPP pre-qualification dossiers. And in the ASEAN countries, uh, they have the Asian Common Technical Document, or the ACTD, which is very similar to the CTD format, which we looked at earlier. Now, generic drug applications are called abbreviated or abridged because they are generally not required to include preclinical, which is animal, and clinical, which is human data, to establish safety and effectiveness. Instead, a generic applicant must scientifically demonstrate that its product is bioequivalent. That is, it performs in the same manner as the innovator drug. Uh, I could go into the details of bioequivalence and what it is, but I think in the interest of time, we'll have to leave it for another session at some point. Now, we come to the overall procedure for the approval of a generic drug in the US. The ANDA, as I mentioned earlier, is an abbreviated new drug application. Now, what are the main laws and policies which govern approvals of generic products in the US? The first one is the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, obviously, just like we have our Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act over here. The US also has the same thing. Then you have the Code of Federal Regulations. This is the act, and then these are the rules under the act, which are the actual regulations which we are required to comply with. And then the Current Good Manufacturing Practices, or CGMP, which is actually a part of the Code of Federal Regulations, or the CFR. And ANDA, as we talked about earlier, it is an abbreviated new drug application, and the FDA requires this application to be submitted for the approval of a generic drug for sale in the United States. Now, they're abbreviated because, like I said, you don't have to submit detailed clinical or preclinical data or clinical trials. Only bioequivalence data is required. Now, the FDA has a set of clearly defined procedures and guidelines to facilitate the approval of pharmaceutical dosage forms, and all manufacturers of pharmaceutical dosage forms are required to comply with rigid CGMP standards, and the FDA will conduct pre-approval inspections of all manufacturing firms as part of the approval process for the ANDA. If they come to inspect you and they find your facility not up to standard, they will not approve the ANDA. So in addition, detailed documentation relating to the factory site as well as specific products needs to be submitted for review to the FDA. And they are going to look at everything before giving your ANDA an approval. So what are the activities that you are required to do in order to develop the data and to put together the documentation and submit an ANDA? So here we have a list of all the activities in sequence, and this is the documentation that you need to generate. So the first thing you need to do is to identify and procure reference listed drugs. Now, what is a reference listed drug? It is nothing but the innovator product based on which you have made your generic product, and you're saying that this my product is the same as innovator product X. Let's say, for example, ranitidine. In the US, the brand name is Zantac. Glaxo was the first company to, to make that product, and therefore it is the innovator. Now, if I make a ranitidine tablet, I have to compare it to Glaxo's ranitidine tablet and demonstrate that my product works in the same way as Zantac works. So Zantac is going to be my reference drug, based on which I'm going to compare my product to it and then generate all the required data with reference to Zantac. So you have to identify the reference listed drug uh, against which you want to be comparing your product. The next thing to do, one of two things. Either your company already manufactures the active substance, which is ranitidine, or you may have to buy ranitidine from somewhere. Now, in order to do that, now suppose you make your own ranitidine, then you have to file a type 2 DMF for ranitidine and submit it to the FDA, or you might have already done that before. Otherwise, if you don't make the API yourself, then you have to find somebody who has already filed a type 2 DMF for ranitidine with the US FDA, and then you have to contact them and basically negotiate quantities, prices, and also get what is known as a letter of authorization from them, so that you can put that letter of authorization in your ANDA before you send it to the FDA, saying that I'm going to use ranitidine made by XYZ manufacturer, and here's a reference to their type 2 DMF, which is a part of my ANDA. So you have to obtain authorization from the DMF holder for cross-reference in the ANDA, so that the FDA knows that this is the ranitidine that has been used in the manufacture of your product. So the third thing then you have to do is locate the sources of inactive substances and packaging materials. So you have to look for manufacturers who already have type 4 and type 3 drug master files already filed with the USA for excipients and the packaging materials. Same way, obtain letters of authorization from them and include them as part of your ANDA. The next thing, oops, sorry about that. The next thing you need to do, you need to manufacture 3 pivotal batches of dosage form in accordance with all CGMP regulations, using all of these substances, your APIs, your excipients, and your packaging materials that you have previously identified. And then you have to start preparing your formulation plant and ANDA documentation, in the sense that you have to have your master and batch production control documents ready, and you have to manufacture the product exactly as per that, because those documents would need to be included in your ANDA to tell the FDA that this is how we made the product, these are the records, and this is how much material we used, and this is how much time we took to make the batch for blending or compression or packaging or whatever. Okay, once you have made these 3 batches, you have to retain samples for submission to the FDA, you also have to retain enough samples for multiple in vitro analytical tests, for stability studies, and to do your bioequivalence studies. And these samples also have to be sent to the FDA. So you have to keep enough samples for that. Okay. Then once you have collected those samples, the first thing you do is start doing your stability studies. Both you put those 3 batches for stability studies. So the accelerated stability studies would run for 6 months, and the long-term stability studies would run for a maximum of 5 years, depending on how soon your product deteriorates. Okay. All the results of your accelerated stability studies have to be included in the ANDA. You cannot submit an ANDA without doing accelerated stability studies for 6 months. That is something you need to keep in mind. And for the long-term studies, you have to continue to keep on submitting the results to the FDA as and when you do the analysis at different time points. Then you have to do your in vitro studies, which is analyze those batches and make sure that they conform to all the specifications and compare favorably with, let's say, for example, Zantac, that is your innovative product. And similarly, you have to do your bioequivalence studies, both comparing the innovator product as well as your own product, and just basically discuss the protocol with the FDA. It's always good to do that. And then do the studies because they cost a lot of money. And once the studies are done, you include that report in module 5 of the ANDA. In an ANDA, you're generally not required to file a module 4. Why? Because module 4 is preclinical studies, which are generally done for safety on animals. And because this is a generic product, you're not required to do those studies. So an ANDA will not have a module 4. Now, once you've compiled all this data and put it together in the required format, then you send it through the electronic submissions gateway to the FDA. Now, once the FDA receives, I'm sorry, can you see my screen? Once the FDA receives the submission, can you see my screen? Okay. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. I think I probably did something here where I lost sight of it. So I was just a little concerned. Okay. So once the FDA receives this ANDA submission, then it screens it for format and content. Now, if it is complete, then it will go for further review. If it is incomplete, let's say the format is wrong or certain sections are missing, then they will simply send a refuse to file letter to the applicant, and no further review will be done because it's been sent back, and you have to correct everything and send it to them again. Now, once it goes for further review, then it splits up into 2 different parts. One is the pharmacokinetic section, where you have your bioequivalence study reports, and the other is the chemistry, manufacturing, and control section, which is basically your manufacturing, analytical data, and all the chemistry part of the application. Okay, now in both these divisions, this is the division of bioequivalence, and this is the CDER. Okay, so in terms of the pharmacokinetic section, if the data is satisfactory, then that's it. You don't need to do anything more. If it is unsatisfactory, then a deficiency letter is sent to the applicant, and there is no further review till you submit additional data that the FDA may ask you to submit. The same thing happens over here, that if all the data is okay, then it goes further. If there are any deficiencies at this stage, then they send a deficiency letter and ask you to send additional data or correct whatever information it is that they think is wrong, or sometimes they may even make you do all the batches again, or they can say that, hey, you got to do this again, or we don't like this, or your analytical results are not okay, or you have exceeded X limits of solvents, or this or that, or what have you, and you may be asked to give explanations or rectify whatever it is that they want you to rectify. Now, if everything is okay, then they go to the labeling review, your labeling material and the label claims that you have made, and what are you saying on the label and everything, and whether that is okay or not. Okay. And on the other side, they will review the DMF for the active substances, and if relevant, if the excipient is non-compendial, then they will also review the DMF for the excipients. Now, these are the DMFs for which you have already given letters of authorization from your suppliers. And so the FDA will open those DMFs, they will review those DMFs and see whether the quality of the API, excipient, packaging material, everything is okay with respect to the product that you have submitted. Now, if everything is okay, then your API or excipient facility, they will go to inspect the API facility. They generally do not inspect facilities which make compendial or pharmacopoeial excipients. If the excipients are novel excipients, then they will go to inspect, but otherwise they would not normally go to inspect an excipient factory if it is making a pharmacopoeial excipient. But they will inspect the API manufacturer. So once that inspection is okay, then it goes further. If there is any problem with the API manufacturer's facility, then they send a deficiency letter to the API manufacturer, and your ANDA approval process stops till such time as your API manufacturer corrects whatever is wrong. Okay. So on this side, if your labeling and everything else is okay, then the process moves forward. Otherwise, you get another deficiency letter asking you to correct whatever it is that you have done wrong or give more data. And once you have done that and everything is okay, then they will come to inspect the formulation facility. Now, these two things, the bulk drug approval facility or the API manufacturing facility and pre-approval inspection of the formulation plant, generally happen around the same time because they have to work out their logistics and everything. But then they could also be far apart depending on how long deficiencies are it takes to correct the deficiencies, or how long it takes to submit additional data. But then ideally, if everything is okay, then they try to do the inspections more or less in the same time period. Okay, now if both the inspections are okay, then you're clear and your ANDA finally gets approved. Now, if at both inspections there are deficiencies with respect to the facility, again, you get a GMP non-compliance notice, and then you have to satisfy the requirements in terms of whatever they ask you to do. So, as you can see, the whole process is very elaborate and does not leave out, anything that could possibly impact, the quality, safety, and the efficacy of the product. So this is, in short, how an ANDA is approved. The most important thing that people often don't pay too much attention to is product labeling. Now, the safe use of all drug products depends on users reading the labeling and packaging carefully and accurately, and being able to assimilate and act on the information presented. What does this mean? It simply means that when you have a product out there, let's say you have a sanitizer, it says XYZ, whatever, you have to be able to read what it is, and you have to be able to understand how it is to be used. Okay. Now, that is the basic purpose of a product label. And particularly in case of pharmaceutical products, this is critical because, I mean, if the person who's actually going to consume the product does not know what to do with it, how much to take, how often to take it, and under what circumstances it should not be taken, then the results or the consequences could be very, very, very disastrous. So the primary purpose of drug product labeling and packaging is the clear and unambiguous identification of the product and the conditions for its safe use. So all countries in the regulated markets, especially the US FDA and the European Economic Area, have established detailed and elaborate regulations governing the labeling of drug products and have defined structured labeling specifications for all drug products. The US Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act defines labeling as all labels and other written, printed, or graphic matter upon any article or any of its containers or wrappers or accompanying such article. So it's not only the actual label on the container, but anything that accompanies a product and tells you something about the product. That is what a product label is. It is a collection of all of these things. And I'll show you this a little later. Uh, the US, well, all drug products must include a package insert if the label does not contain all the necessary information. And this is a document which is provided along with a drug product, which gives additional and complete information about that drug as mandated by regulation. Now, this is a mandatory requirement in both the United States and in Europe. You have to give full information to the patient in the form of a package insert or a leaflet. If your label is big enough, you can put all the information on the label. It doesn't matter. But most products, don't have containers or labels which are big enough to accommodate all the information that is required to be given by regulation. Therefore, you have package inserts. In the United States, package inserts or outserts are formally known as prescribing information, and in Europe as patient information leaflets for human medicines. Okay, now an insert is like if you have a carton and you put your leaflet inside that carton along with the strip or the bottle or whatever it is, then that's an insert. Many times, in order to save on packaging costs, if a product is packed in a bottle, what companies normally do is they just have a leaflet which is folded in a particular way and just taped to the lid or the side of the bottle, which does not cover the label. So uh, that's how products are generally labeled. If they're OTC products, then the container or the box of that product should contain information which is structured in a particular way, and we'll come to that. Okay, here's what it is. Now, this is a typical label of a prescription drug product in the United States. Well, as you can see, the drug is amitriptyline, and this is an actual label which we designed and submitted to the FDA for approval, and it's all done and dusted. So I have no problem in, and this is the actual NDC number of the product. So what does the label contain? First of all, what is the active ingredient and the strength? What is the dosage? Okay, so here there's not enough space, therefore the dosage is mentioned on the package outsert, which is a folded leaflet. Then what are the conditions of dispensing and storage? So it has to be kept in a tightly closed, light resistant container as described in the USP/RNF, with a child resistant closure as required, because this is a prescription product. All prescription products have necessarily to be packed in child resistant containers. And therefore, you also have this direction: keep this and all medication out of reach of children. And then the storage conditions: 20 degrees to 25 degrees centigrade. And because the US follows a Fahrenheit system, that's 68 to 77. And excursions are permitted between these ranges: 15 to 30 and 50 to 86. And this is according to the USP prescribed storage conditions for pharmaceuticals. And then protect from light because it's photosensitive. All these instructions should be there on the label. And then, of course, the NDC number, the number of tablets or dosage units, name of the drug, the compendial standard, the strength. It also has to say RX only, means only to be sold on prescription, and then the name of the company and the address that's distributing the product. And it also contains an instruction to the pharmacist that please dispense with medication guide. Now, there are certain drugs, this is basically a CNS drug, so it has to be dispensed with a specific patient guide uh, by the pharmacist. He cannot just give you tablets and say fine. The patient has to be given information along with the medication, and this is the barcode, which is actually the codified NDC number of the product. If you see the NDC number here, 691580010 is the same number here. And then you also have to have the lot number and the expiry date, which is printed at the time the batch is manufactured. Now, this is basically what that patient information leaflet looks like. This is the front, this is the back. I'm sorry, I mean, it's too in terms of size, this is much bigger than what it looks over here. Obviously, that's why you can't read anything. But then even then, the print is really small. And then it's folded up in a fan fold kind of fashion. One fold here, one fold here, one fold here, one fold here. And this is the front, this is the back. And it's designed in such a way that it folds like a fan. And then it is folded up and taped to the bottle. And this information actually is supposed to constitute what is called the structured product labeling, or the complete labeling for the product. This is mandated by regulation. If you don't have this, your product is considered to be either adulterated or misbranded. And that is a very, very serious offense under US laws. So you have to be very careful. Now, this is an example of the labeling for an OTC drug. In the United States, naproxen, the 220 milligram strength, is OTC, just like a lot of other drugs which are still prescription drugs in India. Say, for example, ibuprofen over here is not an OTC drug, but in the US, the 200 milligram strength is an OTC drug. There are many, even ranitidine. There are so many others, omeprazole. But in any case, this is the labeling. Now, this product is also sold in a bottle of 30 tablets. So the label here is going to be very similar for the bottle as what we saw earlier. The difference is that over here, the company wants to promote a certain brand. That is why they have a brand logo. And the name of the company is not as prominent, although it is there and it's very clear, but it's not as prominent as the brand. So this is something that they want to sell in drugstores because people are going to buy it directly without consulting a doctor and everything. So therefore, you have the facing label here, which basically identifies what the product is, and then it says, okay, fine, for 12-hour pain relief, etc., etc. It also has the NDC number. And then the most important thing is see drug facts for warnings and full information. Now, the drug facts, this is the outer carton of the product. So you have the first panel, which is directions, dosage. Then for children under 12 years, what is the dosage, everything is very, very clearly given here. And then there's also a number that you can call in case, there's an overdose or everything. There are poison centers that that you can call, and you have to give the number over here, and the same warning to keep out of reach of children, and then storage conditions. Then here, other information, you're also required to reveal what your inactive ingredients are, because people may be allergic to something. If it is a prescription product, then the doctor usually asks whether you're allergic to something or the other, and the doctor would know what that medicine contains, and he will not give it to you if you're going to be allergic to it. This is an OTC product. Therefore, the patient is going to buy it directly, and therefore you have to reveal what the inactive ingredients are, so that if the patient is allergic, then they would not buy it, or at least they've been told that, look, this drug contains this particular ingredient, and if you're allergic, you should not take it. Then drug facts. So what is the strength, and what are the uses? What is the purpose? It's used as a pain reliever or to relieve fever, and then these are the uses. And then what are the warnings? So it has a series of things like if this happens, do this. If this happens, do this. Or consult your doctor if you get this symptom or this side effect or whatever. And then for pregnant mothers, there's a whole other list of conditions. So for an OTC product, the information that you have to give to the patient is very, very precise. And that is the reason why product labeling over there is very, very, very critical. And that's, if you want to sell either an OTC or a prescription product in the United States, you have to make sure that you comply with all of these requirements. Okay. Now, having done all of this, then there's a whole lot of other things that you can do. There's so many aspects about the pharma business that we have not been able to cover here. But then, you are also required to do a lot of strategic planning in terms of selecting what markets you want to go into, what products you want to make, what products you want to develop, what products you want to license in from other companies, or what products that you may have that you want to license out, or if you want to make your products yourself. or if you want to get them made at somebody else's facility, like a contract manufacturing facility. And if you're making APIs, then who are the people you're going to sell to and how are you going to find them? There's all of those things. I think the scope is too wide to cover here. But then again, every activity that you do has to be under the backdrop of a very, very elaborate system of regulations. So that is what you have to keep in the back of your mind all the time. Regulations in the pharmaceutical industry are always looking over your shoulder. And that is why, for many of you, I'm sure a lot of you here are students who are aspiring for careers in different areas or functional areas of the pharmaceutical industry. This is an excellent career choice because no matter what, if you want to get a product to market without regulatory approvals and regulatory compliance, you will not be able to do that. Therefore, regulatory professionals today and quality assurance professionals today are in greater demand than ever before. And don't worry, the pharmaceutical industry is going nowhere. In fact, in these troubled times, the significance and the importance and the contributions that the industry is making, to overall health and well-being have only increased, and they are only going to become more and more significant in the future. So in terms of career opportunities and everything, if you focus on a career based on regulatory affairs, I think you would be making a very, very, very good choice. This brings me to the end of my talk. I'd like to thank all of you for being so patient. I think we took a lot longer than what we intended to take, but that's the nature of the beast. Like I said, we have barely scratched the surface. Thank you all. And I'd like to turn the mic over to the organizers again. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. It was really a great session, sir.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. So actually, we have received too many questions from the audience, but due to time constraints, and as you have covered almost all the crucial aspects, so with your due permission, can we skip this question answer session?
I have no problem. I will leave it entirely to you.
Yes, sir, because actually you have almost covered all the topics.
So I suppose a lot of the questions have already been answered. I hope.
Yes,
I hope so.
Yes, sir.
I think it was very extensive, very extensive.
Thank you.
You have been continuously talking for last 2 hours. And I think it was a very useful information. Even we people came to know many things. And I think I will take little bit of pity on you. You should have a glass full of water and some cold drink. And so therefore, I suggest we will directly go to the vote of thanks.
No problem.
With your kind permission. Yeah, madam.
Absolutely.
Okay, once again, good evening, everyone. I, Professor Kajal Paviskar, deem it a great honor to present vote of thanks on this occasion. Thank you very much, sir, for sparing your valuable time for this webinar. The session was really very enriching and wonderful. Sir has made us aware regarding many unexplored concepts of regulatory affairs and compliance in pharma industry. We would definitely like to hear from you, sir, in future. I would like to thank our management and trustees of KKWAK Education Society for granting the permission to conduct the webinar. I would like to thank Dr. K.S. Jain, sir, Coordinator, KKWES Pharmacy Institutes and Principal, KKWAK College of Pharmacy, Nashik, and Professor R.A. Hirore, sir, Principal Kekewak Institute of Pharmacy, Chandori, for their valuable guidance and motivating us. My special thanks to the technical team and organizing team. This webinar could not have been successful without them. I would like to thank all participants for the wonderful response for the webinar. Last but not the least, I would like to thank my colleagues for their help during this webinar. Here, with due permission of Sir, I would like to conclude the session. Have a great evening. Stay home, stay safe.
Thank you very much, my
you.
dear friend Asaf, and thank you very much to all the attendees for being there for last 2 hours. And thanks a lot to Kajal and the team. Thank you very much. So we'll close the webinar. Thank you. Thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
all. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Good night.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Shall we close the webinar, sir?
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks so much.